Oh, hi there YouTubers. As I've said before on a few of my videos when I do about my knives and things, obviously I don't put a huge amount out there, just when I think I've got something either that I think might help somebody or somebody might find interesting. So this is going to be slightly in two parts, this little video. I'll keep it as short as I can. One is just a couple of things that I've sort of like found out and worked with for over, well, actually a few months now, so this isn't a quick thing, but about the heat treatment, and more importantly around the actual quenching of that. And then I'm just going to finish off with a quick show of some knives that are going out, because a couple of people have said, you know, they'd quite like to have a little look at them on the telly while they're going there, so I'm going to do that now. Hopefully the video will go out today, and then the knives will go off this afternoon. So yeah, so initially, like I say, was about the heat treatment that I do. Now, what I've found over a period of time, because what I do is I do my heat treat. If I'm actually doing my knives, I do my heat treat to the hardening, and then I get straight into the tempering, and then from the tempering is when I do my first Rockwell test to see where everything's at. That's really because I just don't want to take the chance on the actual blades of anything, you know, any microfractures or stressors and things like that going in, you know, actually into the blades after the quench from the hardening cycle. So what I do, like I say, is I do the first Rockwell test after my first temper cycle, and then I also test after the second and then after the third. However, what I found is that, and it's just because I keep little records of things, keep little notes and jotters, which I have to or I forget everything, is I've found some slight variation, and it is a very slight variation, but it wasn't there all the time. So I thought initially it was, oh, I've warmed my oil up, and then you put your first knife in, does the oil get a bit warmer, the second knife goes in a bit warmer, the third knife goes, things like that. So I wasn't too sure, and I think that's part of it, but I don't think, from what I've found, that that's a particularly important point. I think what the point I have found is that somewhere, and I haven't quite found this yet, so I will have a bit of a play, and it's probably going to be a pretty ballpark depending on the size of the blade and the thickness of the steel. What I found is I think that once the oil gets to like above a certain temperature, it doesn't quench the steel as fast, which is pretty, you know, a bit of a no-brainer, I suppose. But when you're actually only talking about the oil being like up to 100 degrees C, but you're quenching a blade from like a carbon steel blade, you're quenching a blade from sort of like 800 odd, or, you know, stainless blades often into the thousands and 1050, 1080. And they on, you know, like with the carbon, with the O1, the aim is to get it under the nose, which is around 400 degrees, in under 10 seconds. So you've got quite a gap there. It's not like a 1095 that you've got about 2 seconds to get it under the nose or whatever. So it did just sort of like make me think a little bit, you know, what was going on. And I think, as much as you wouldn't think that that increase in temperature of the oil would affect the steel, and I'm talking about like 0.5 of a Rockwell point. I'm not talking massive swings here. It's just small amounts. Would be affected by the oil, with the difference in the oil between, say, being it's like 55 to 60 degrees C up to 80, 90 degrees C. And I think there's quite a bit of leeway there. But all of a sudden, what I was finding was that, and if I tried to do, say, 5 or 6 blades, it was the last couple where the Rockwell, from the very first one to the last one, there might be 2 points difference, and that's quite a lot. So one of the things I did was I restricted it to a maximum of 4 blades, and I found that greatly improved the consistency. And then the other thing it is, I watch the size of the blades I put in. So if I'm doing different size blades or different thicknesses, I start to think about what final Rockwell do I want these knives to be performing at. So it's a bit of a, you know, a bit of a juggly. But obviously now what I find is if I'm doing something like a Skinner or a small neck knife or something, that I'm happy to be in between sort of like 59, 60, or a chef's knife that might be 60, 61. They go in first. That seems fine. The middle ones, again, there's not enough variation to worry about. If I'm, for argument's sake, doing a larger blade, the largest blades I tend to do are sort of like 7 to 8 inch, but they can be 5mm thick, 40mm deep, so they're quite a big knife. And that can be, if I'm putting that in at the end, that can be up to 2 points lower after the first temper cycle than the other blades. But consider I'm actually aiming for sort of like a 55, 56 with them, that's absolutely fine. I still have to do a higher level tempering cycle to bring them down. But it's just something, it's a bit of an anomaly. It's not a massive difference, but it's just something to bear in mind for anybody who's, for argument's sake, even if you're only doing one, to keep a check on the temperature of your oil. Don't get your oil too hot. It only needs to be 55, 60 degrees, and that's this stuff I've read about things, and that seems to work. As long as I've got the oil, like if I've got a bit more time and I'm doing maybe 2 or 3 blades, so I'm not getting that production line going, getting them out of the kiln and quenching them, the oil has a bit more time to cool down and I don't get any variation. When I was doing more and I was trying to do 5 or 6, so I wanted them all out as quickly and as cleanly as I could, that's when I started to notice the difference. And the only difference I could think of, because obviously between each one being quenched, I make sure that the kiln is back up to the temperature I want it at before I quench the steel, because it only drops a few points anyway. But with doing more, I found a bigger difference, and the only variation I could think of was the oil was getting hotter. So that's just something to bear in mind. You know, that if you're doing a bigger knife, when you do your first temper cycle, potentially don't do it as high as, start on the lower end, because don't forget you want 2 or 3 temper cycles anyway. So the first one can just be designed, just think of your first temper cycle, which is what I do, as being just the stress reliever. That's not where you want your blades to be at the end. Don't aim for your final hardness with your first temper cycle, unless you're only going to do one. But that's preferences in the steel types. But it's just something to bear in mind, is that oil, the temperature of the oil of the quench. I suppose the other way around, I could set up, say, a couple of quench tanks, get them both up to the right temperature, but that's an awful lot of faffing around when you're just trying to get the blades out. Whether that would work or whether that would cause more hassle than not, I don't know. So yeah, it's a bit of a ramble really and it's really about the heat treat side and the quenching them, and it's probably more aimed at somebody who's going to be doing a batch, maybe do a few if you've got for argument's sake, if you're working in 4s, 5s or 6s, just something to keep in mind. There's a bloody good chance, depending on the time you're taking, that if they're all coming out of the kiln, if they're coming out separately, by the time you get into your 5th and 6th knife, that oil's got quite hot and it's not going to bring your nose down as quick, which means you could potentially be having those last, the last couple, they're already maybe 1, maybe 2 points lower on the Rockwell before you go to your tempering. That means once you temper them, they're going to stay lower than the others, so you're going to end up with, the knives right where you want them, knives that are actually that close nobody's going to make a difference, and knives actually that are going to be a couple of points lower and not performing to where you want them. Whether anybody's actually bothered about that, I don't know, but I am. That's one of the things that I'm constantly working at. So that's that. Next thing, last couple of minutes, and I'll just show you. So Paul, first one. Here we are. This is the bushcrafter you wanted. Now this is the sort of like the wood store standard wood. I call it a woodcrafter, but the bushcraft style knife. This is 3mm or 1 at 59 Rockwell, 26-degree bevel. This is some very old Pahuta cower I got. Really old. It was an old rafter timber. It's really hard and solid timber. And mosaic pins, black G10 liners. Obviously slightly. Can't think what's the name there. Slightly beveled pommel. This one is also, there's a bit like strength on the handle. Paul's big hands, he wanted an extra 5mm on the handle, so that's been accounted for there. And hope you're happy with that. Nice plunge lines, which I'm happy with, and nice tip. Hopefully that shows. Leather work, want the belt dangler. So and as always, it's part friction, part wet form, so that's going absolutely nowhere. Little tip there, when you first get your knife out, I'm going to do a video on this, on caring for new knives, but when it's brand new and it's all locks in, little squeeze, you can hear that little, which allows it to pop out really easily. Pop it back in, and she sits there. Also, Paul, we have I'll have to move this around because I'm never sure what's happening with this camera, but that's your Barco Laplander case and belt loop for your axe. So hope you're happy with those. Next, sorry, I'm not sure of your name because this was a chap who's purchased this off of Trade Me. I've just heard from him, so all I've actually got is his acronym on Trade Me. But this is one of my camp knives. This is... I've just realised this is the wrong one. Duh. Heck, there we go. Couldn't have been happy. There we go. I'll put that one away because that's not the one he bought. He actually purchased this one. As soon as I said Puriri, I thought that's not right. This is stabilised Rimo, black G10 liners, stainless steel pins and tube, 4mm steel. This is 5758 on the Rockwell. Now this has a 14-degree primary bevel, taken right down to the edge, and then a very small 40-degree bevel applied at the bottom of that, giving you some really good slicing. It's beautiful. It's amazing. For the thickness of steel, it slices really, really well because of the high grind and very little shoulder that's there. Again, just a slight Coke bottle on there. Not as heavy at the top because I don't want flares here, because you can actually choke down. I know knives are not for chopping, but it does allow you to actually choke down very nicely. Just small limbs off, taking small limbs off and things like that. Heavy tip. I hope that makes it focus. And nice plunge lines. Getting better all the time. And this one is the correct sheath because I know it's got a dangler on it and it's in stainless, but this is the sheath. And again, clicks in, goes nowhere. Even if you pull, little click, and out she pops. There we go, bump. So I hope you'll be very happy with that, and it gets some good hard proper bush use. And lastly, completely the other end of the scale, we have a little Puko. This is a 2mm Puko, red G10 liners, stabilised cowrie scales, obviously a mosaic pin with brass pins. And again, this one actually has a 14-degree, which is 7-degree either side, so a 14-degree inclusive bevel on a 2mm, and then a very, very small micro grind on it. So it's more of a Scandinavian bevel, not a Scandi. And again, we have a belt loop dangler was wanted with this one. So gradually becoming more popular, the old belt danglers. And that clicks in again, and going nowhere. Like I say, a little click, and out she'll pop. Don't push it and pull, just a click and straight out. Obviously, you don't want to be dragging the knife up and down the side of the sheath. There we go. So, hope you guys like the knives that are coming. And thank you for listening to my ramble through the first part about just having a bit of thought around the quench process. I hope you found that interesting and liked looking at the knives. And with that, I will catch you on the flip side, guys.